Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Biollywood Podcast. In this series, we talk about biological threats and the popular culture media that they appear in. I'm JT O'Brien, Research Principal at the Bipartisan Commission on Biodefense, and I'm here with the Commission's Executive Director, Dr. Asha M. Today, we will be talking about the science fiction movie Life from 2017. Life was directed by Daniel Espinosa and written by Rhett Reese and Paul Wernick. The premise of this film is that there's a 6-member crew on the International Space Station, and they uncover the first evidence of extraterrestrial life on Mars. And then when members of the crew conduct their research, the rapidly evolving life form proves to be far more intelligent and dangerous than anyone expected. Before we move on, if you have not seen this film, we would recommend that you do so before continuing the podcast. This podcast will contain spoilers for the movie. And this is your final warning. So from this point forward, we will discuss spoilers. So Asha, where do you think we should start this conversation? Should we describe the cast a little bit?
Yeah, let's talk about the cast and maybe go through the timeline a bit.
Sure. So for the cast, we have Jake Gyllenhaal, who's playing Dr. David Jordan from the United States and is the ISS medical officer. Then we have Rebecca Ferguson, who's playing Dr. Miranda North, who's from the United Kingdom and is playing the CDC quarantine officer. Then we have Ryan Reynolds as Rory Adams from the USA, and he is an ISS flight engineer. Then we have Hiroyuki Sanada as Sho Murakami from Japan, or probably JAXA, who is the ISS systems engineer. Then we have Arian Bakare as Dr. Hugh Derry, also from the United Kingdom, and is the ISS exobiologist. Then we have Olga Vichnaya as Katerina, or Kat Golotina. And she is from Russia, and she is the ISS mission commander. So that's the cast that we kind of start with, the 6 people who are on the ISS when this movie starts.
Mm-hmm.
And, starting with the timeline, the way this movie starts out is there's a automated sample return mission coming from Mars, and they think that it has the samples have life in them. So they're sending it to the ISS for these folks to research and do experiments on. And that's kind of where we start. And that's even an issue in and of itself, them actually capturing the automated
so
capsule.
I think it's important to talk about that, because something throws the capsule off course. It's not doing what it was supposed to be doing, and we don't know whether it was I think we assume at the beginning of the movie that it was an asteroid or some sort of space debris that pushed it off course. So it's not coming in at the right speed, and it's not coming in at the right angle as previously expected. So Rory, Ryan Reynolds' character, has to go out, and he doesn't have to catch it personally or physically himself, but he has to move the arms of the International Space Station to catch it coming in. So I agree, JT. I mean, well, first of all, I think that is incredibly dangerous anyway. It could have smashed into the space.
Could have killed everybody on board.
It could have killed everybody just period for that. And then what if it had gone, wildly off into another direction? It could have gone and hit Earth. It could have gone and hit the moon. It could have gone and hit, satellites or something,
Right.
It's not great, but of course this is a movie, and they're trying to start it out in a pretty exciting way, and they do. It is pretty tension filled in a fun way to see Ryan Reynolds out there trying to maneuver the arms in a way to catch it, and of course then he does.
Yeah, it almost reminds me of Interstellar a little bit, the way they played that scene, like the docking sequence from Interstellar, when it's super tense and they have to dock.
Yeah.
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 It seems similar to that.
It is.
But I think, Yeah, but I think it shows there are already issues that are happening. I think you brought up a really great point. What if this goes to Earth? We've already seen from later in the film that they don't even want to risk sending this thing through atmosphere because it survived everything they threw at it. So that would have been a huge risk if it had actually, diverted toward Earth or the moon. And then if they had missed it and it went off into deep space, they'd probably be in a much better situation until they eventually went back to Mars.
Yeah, but it does speak to the need, I think, for some sort of military presence. You can't wait until something. If you could, they should not have been waiting until they found out that the International Space Station could not catch this probe coming back. If for us to launch something to go shoot the probe out of the sky. And I would think that you'd want to shoot it out of the sky, or not out of the sky, out of the atmosphere or whatever. You'd want to, because you don't know what's in it. If we're worried about backward contamination, right? Contamination of Earth, and I would imagine you would have to be. And we find out in the movie that people are concerned about that. Then you can't allow it to just, flop around and, zoom onto Earth in some kind of uncoordinated, uncontrolled manner. But we don't see the military anywhere. Not really, and they don't even mention it for a very, very long time. So I think that points to a need for our international space agencies, NASA among them, to be coordinating with the military. I grant we're not really talking about Space Force, with the United States, but at least not right now. But at some point, we're talking about fighter jets or something, trying to blow something out of the sky. And even then, it's not like they're going to obliterate the probe entirely into molecules. It's going to come down in bits and pieces, and that could still contaminate Earth. So there's a security issue here, but I understand, we have to take a risk.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think you're absolutely right that, it is a huge risk, and, having the military involvement, and I think that's probably where Space Force needs to step forward a little bit, but I do get, given the international structure of this mission, that maybe there might be some kind of agreement in place or something like that where they don't want the military to be involved.
Yeah.
But at the same time, a lot of our astronauts are former military. I don't think anybody on the ISS throughout this movie had former military experience, though, which is odd, unless Kat did, and she was secretly a KGB agent, but I don't believe that.
Yeah, they certainly don't mention it.
Yeah.
They don't mention it, which is unusual for a space movie. Usually there's somebody either that's still in the military or was formerly in the military. But either way, it doesn't matter. We're really talking about what could blow something out of the Earth's orbit, out of the atmosphere and move it somewhere else. But that's fine. This is the beginning of the movie. It starts out pretty exciting with this big catch. And they successfully catch it.
Yeah, so then they successfully catch it, and they start bringing the samples in. They bring the samples in immediately. The CDC quarantine officer, Dr. Miranda North, who's played by Rebecca Ferguson, has a few firewalls, is what she calls them, set up in place for containment. So they start, analyzing these samples in a glove box, basically, that, you can regulate the temperature and the oxygen and all of that cool stuff, which is pretty interesting. And then that's within a larger containment area, which still isn't that big. So they start experimenting with it. It looks like, they did find a life form, but it looks like it's either dead or in hibernation, until they start messing with the controls of the glove box. And adjusting the temperature, kind of making it more similar to Earth's atmosphere than than Mars's current atmosphere, which leads to the kind of the default assumption, I think, that this is an ancient microorganism that probably flourished on Mars a few 100 million years ago when it had the same conditions as Earth or similar conditions to Earth, but then went into a deep hibernation once Mars got stripped of its atmosphere.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I wasn't going to agree that it's evidence of an ancient organism, but you're right. That I think that is the implication. Otherwise, we would be saying that there's some kind of environment in Mars, like inside, that has similar Earth characteristics that would allow this thing to grow
and evolve over time.
Yeah. So, but I think this is a good point, a good part to talk about right now. This whole thing with the bringing the specimen inside. Okay, I guess they had to do that, I suppose, but they did not have adequate biosafety and biosecurity measures in place.
No.
They really didn't. Even for us here on Earth, nobody would be trying to deal with organisms without being in complete and total overgarments
he wasn't wearing any PPE.
Nothing.
Just relying on the glove box. Like that's
crazy.
That's BSL-2 level. It's
it's so low level, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
High school laboratory
level. Yeah.
And for something that's so unusual, we've never seen it before, we don't know what it is, we're reconstituting it. To me, when I was watching it, I was thinking about anthrax, that creates spores.
Yeah, and they do mention anthrax in the film.
Oh, right. So, what do we do with it? We're not doing anthrax work in a BSL level 2 laboratory, but I do understand this is Hollywood, and Hollywood is not wanting to leave people in suits the whole movie because then you couldn't see them, and it would make for kind of a boring movie. So I get that, but the lack of realism here was too much for me. I just thought, this is insane. I can't believe you're doing this. And at least there is one character that eventually agrees with my point of view on this. Rory, Brian Reynolds' character, begins to have issues with what's happening. He doesn't like that Earth children have named the organism and given it a very human name. I think they call it, what is it, Calvin?
Yeah, Calvin is the name. He's also the one who brings up anthrax. I think him and Rebecca Ferguson do.
Okay.
Some aspect, and they're telling the exobiologist, that could have been anthrax for all we know, and because he screwed something up when he was first testing it, and screwed something up with the containment procedures, and there was a leak or something, and it didn't amount to anything, but obviously, like Rory and Dr. North, they were like, you can't do that. If that was anthrax, we'd all be dead. And he's like, you can't compare it to anthrax, though, which ends up being true, but not because of what he thought.
Yeah, and look, I think it is an indication of someone getting really excited about something. We get that, and this notion of risk. You do have to take some risks in order to, experience this stuff and figure these things out. And frankly, it could be that something could come in from another planet, and nothing we have would protect against it anyway. Which raises ethical questions about whether we should be in that scenario conducting scientific experiments on things, or where we should be doing that. At least it was up in the International Space Station, and not one of these specimens that got brought all the way back down to Earth somewhere, to the Johnson Space Center or somewhere else. But I just thought, I don't know. I don't think I took the time to see who, if anybody, advised on this particular thing, and I don't know if their advice was disregarded. Somebody, some laboratorian might have been standing there on set screaming about how
how
dumb
this doesn't make sense.
Yeah, but I just even for what they were doing, I thought it was ridiculous. It was ridiculous that they would just keep going and going and going. This one guy,
Yeah.
Here's this thing, and now it starts it's not just a microorganism. It starts dividing, it starts growing, it becomes a thing, it becomes
right.
an entity.
It starts as a single cell and then becomes multicellular very fast.
Right.
And starts to grow, like, and you said, grow, and goes from a single cell to the size of something like maybe the size of your hand.
Right.
That should have been when they started shutting things down a bit, I think.
Yes, I totally agree. When it starts following his finger and
it's not cute. Like, he thought it was cute, but it's not cute.
Well, even if it is cute, that's an indication, right? Look at how fast it's growing, and we have no idea what you could have grown to just be like explode out
of that
of the entire thing. Yeah, at that rate of growth. But I think another important point here is what could they have done to stop it from growing? They started it down this path. What were they going to do? I don't know that they had adequate protocols. They do talk about protocols later, and the need to protect Earth at all costs, but they didn't seem to have any kind of fail-safe protocol where, okay, like, this is what I would have done if I could have. I would have designed it so that little laboratory they had was something you could press a button from the outside and it would just go off. Yes.
Yeah.
It would be aimed, or it would aim itself towards the sun, and that's where it would go, and it would just burn up, and that would be the end of it, and we would all just have to live with the fact that that's what happened. It's not like they couldn't go back to Mars and go get some more.
Get more, right?
Or decide, hey, this is really crazy and scary. Let's not bring this anywhere off of Mars. We will experiment with it, but now what this means is we have to invest more in these space programs, and we have to bring a whole bunch of material over to Mars so we can create a laboratory on Mars and not remove this thing from Mars, or use some other moon somewhere. But they didn't design it properly.
I completely agree. I think that's a great idea. Like, being able to have a detachable laboratory, where that has its own engines, everything, that it can just shoot off into the sun.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would probably be the best protocol. But, and like you said, it can always go and get more. And I think that's why, that's a partial reason why, Dr. Hugh Derry, who was the exobiologist, was so interested in this, is because, that this organism has a dual use nature to it. Yes, it's extremely dangerous, but at the same time, its ability to, replicate somatic cells and produce new ones and differentiate between create nerve cells and, visual, optical, nerve cells, and a ton of other types of cells that this thing is able to just create. That's basically like stem cell research, but better almost. So there's a huge dual use thing here. Like, well, yeah, if we could harness this, there's a lot that we could do for a lot of, common diseases that, affect the human population. So there's that dual use nature to it.
Mm-hmm.
And they only kind of bring that up once. I think once they realize it's dangerous, they correctly make the right assumption that it's not worth it. That kind of research that is just not worth it, given.
Well, it's not worth it at that point in time.
At that point in time. But in the future, like you said, yeah, I think putting it on Mars, keeping it on Mars, but then that means we have to send people to Mars to study it.
Well, I think there are also implications for our moon base, right? We're building a moon base on the moon, obviously. I have wondered, are there plans, are there plans to put a laboratory up there? Because that sounds, it feels like it's an in-between possibility. Don't leave it on the International Space Station, stick it on the moon, but you'd still have to be able to jettison it, right?
Yeah, you'd still want that capability, and which would be easy to do on the moon because there's little to no gravity. Mm-hmm. So it wouldn't be difficult to develop something like that, I don't think.
Yeah. But even so, I don't know that people have to be this ridiculous in terms of how they're dealing with an organism that starts to grow into an actual entity in a laboratory.
Right.
I think that it's something. I think it's something they could have addressed a bit better in this movie. I think they could have. I know, like we were saying at the beginning, there's some stuff that they did just for for the excitement of it. And I also grant that if this organism was so totally under control, once again, we would have had a really boring movie. It needed to get out of control. But I also think that it really irked me that the only person who really started having significant difficulties with the growth of this organism, the management of this organism, the security and the safety regarding this organism, the only person was the engineer who, I guess, engineers are trained to sort of, look out for problems and engineer
assess risks. Yeah.
But
and to be fair, Rebecca Ferguson, as the CDC quarantine officer, did have
concerns, but she wasn't as vocal, I don't think. I think because, she's, well, why are they there? They're there because they're of this exciting thing. They're trying to discover a new organism, new life. They have it. They have to do something with it. But you're right. She, it's not like she just sits quietly for the whole movie. Eventually, everybody's on board, obviously, because it grows and it becomes such a huge threat. Now, I want to ask you what you thought about Calvin, the organism now entity, basically breaking out of the glove box, attacking the scientist that has been so cavalier in his manipulation and interaction with this organism. It breaks out, it basically attacks him. He's already, I think he's partially paralyzed to begin with. Right. But, of course, being in space allows him to do stuff regardless of his paralysis. But he's not physically at this point in a position to be able to do anything for himself, for the space station or whatever. So the organism, I think, starts moving around, right? Doesn't the entity, Calvin starts jumping around all over the place. And
Calvin starts wrapping its finger or its appendages around the hand of the exobiologist.
Okay.
In the glove box.
And so
he's like, "Oh, I can't get it to let go."
And then do they burn it? No, that's later.
No, he tries to distract it with this tiny little shock stick thing that it had broke when he was trying to resuscitate it. And then the thing gets so strong it ends up breaking his hand. And there is a moment of time where his hand breaks and he's out of the the danger zone, and Calvin has not yet escaped the box. He could have gotten out in that time. They could have opened the door and let him and pulled him out, I think, within the time that they had. Because then what Calvin does, and this shows a level of intelligence at an extremely early point, picks up the little electric prod thing and uses it to escape through the glove and cut through the glove and get out that way. once it started getting out of the glove, I think that's the point of no return. Where you can't open that door again. There was a chance to save him, but I think the ridiculous part is Ryan Reynolds went in too late to go and try and save him.
Yes. But then, even then, okay, so he goes in, he grabs the scientist, he throws him out through the door, and then it's really too late, and he closes the door.
Yeah, he closes the door
on himself. He closes himself in there, and then...
And they try and burn it.
And I could not tell throughout the movie whether Calvin absorbs energy from all these shocks and fires and things they keep, blasting it with, or whether it's a case of, it doesn't kill me, makes me stronger, that he's, or it is responding, it's pushing back against something, and it's making it stronger. Both of those things happen with us as humans. I don't know. But now, again, they have this opportunity to say, okay, we have to shut everything down. We have to close everything down, close it, isolate it, and then they can't. They try-ish, but they cannot. It's moving around, it's jumping around, it's in and out of things. And then does it not enter the space station? It gets up in the HVAC or something, right?
Yeah, which I also think was ridiculous when I was rewatching this. They have to shut down every single airflow valve manually and individually. You're telling me a lab like that doesn't have just a one-button solution to close all of the air valves?
Well, and talking about lack of indoor air quality.
Yeah.
We're sitting around, our nation and other nations right now are just talking about, making sure the tiniest of microbes doesn't get anywhere automatically, right?
Right.
But they did not account for some giant thing moving through the system. It doesn't, even in a building here. I don't believe.
I don't care how much it can squeeze through things. I don't think it could get through our air filtration systems.
Or it would. I mean, of course, it would have to be extremely strong. But in this case, I totally agree with you. There should be no shutting down of anything manually. And if there is, it should be one button.
Yeah.
Where you're telling the computer, shut it all down, all of it, and let it decide and let it move faster. I mean, this is a very nice application of AI. Just tell it, do this, and let it take care of it, because there's no way that a human being, anyway, with their own reflexes, is going to do this very quickly. And there's also, I would hope, there's no way that this is what it is like up on the International Space Station, that they're doing things manually. How old is the space station?
It is pretty old, to be fair. But at the same time, if you're going to have a lab up there, these are the kinds of things you need to consider and upgrade. And you can't be using 1970s technology. You could still do it with 1970s technology and make it all.
Well, it just seems to me that, given what we saw, that if that was realistic, and we have no idea whether it's realistic for the International Space Station, at least the International Space Station in this movie never accounted for an actual extraterrestrial body to be inside the International Space Station and have to secure itself against that.
Right. So they just didn't anticipate, is what you're saying.
Right.
That something like this could happen.
They might have anticipated like microorganisms. They might have, bacteria, viruses, or something that seems like that or looks like that, but they didn't anticipate this.
Right.
Or didn't. Well, anticipation that translated into something else. They didn't plan for this eventuality, which is an unusual thing to say. NASA, at least NASA, is all about
safety,
sitting around dreaming up all these weird, scenarios, and then saying, okay, well, how do we plan for that? What would be the plan? How can we avoid that? How can we manage it? So one certainly hopes that NASA watched this movie and said, okay, let's go talk to our friends on the International Space Station and make sure we do something about this. Yeah, but I will say too, JT, I think that this speaks to one of our recommendations about protecting critical infrastructure from biological threats.
Yeah.
We talk about it in recommendation 26 of our most recently released National Blueprint for Biodefense. This is the one we obviously, but we released it in May. But we also have an entire report dedicated to critical infrastructure and its protection. That report is called Insidious Scourge, which I think we thought was a little over the top when we put out that report. But when you're
looking at something like this, movie,
this is an insidious scourge. So, in neither case did we address space architecture and space stuff as being part of critical infrastructure, but in fact it is part of it,
right? Especially satellites and things like that.
And it's not all just about biosecurity and biodefense. It's also about physical security. That's where this International Space Station, for this movie, fails over and over and over again. It has some stuff in place, but this entity, Calvin, defeats those physical security things over and over again because it's smart, or it seems to be. It's stronger than anybody, I guess, ever expected. It's stronger than a human being in many ways, and it gets more and more strong stronger as it grows. So I think that we were right, to talk about of critical infrastructure, and at some point we need to add a section about this. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because anyway, if that went, if Calvin's, there's a point in the movie where, for some inexplicable reason, the comms go down.
Right.
And Kat, I think, goes out to fix it. Calvin is out there, gets out there with her.
And I think they managed to expel
Calvin. And now Calvin's out there with her, latches onto her, breaks her coolant system, so the coolant starts, filling up in her spacesuit and drowning, and almost drowning her. So in that situation, like if Calvin never got back in to the ISS, and if Kat, I think I was talking about this with you before, Kat was trying to keep the door locked and not let her own crewmates let her back in. Had she pushed off, that would have gone, her and Calvin probably would have gone off into orbit. But then at that point, Calvin might start latching onto satellites and breaking down satellites.
We don't know that it wouldn't have jumped anyway, right? Very quickly. We don't know.
Yeah, and it almost has like a wing-like structure, so it might be able to.
Maybe, but there's no air in space, so we would have to have done it very, very quickly. But she started to move. It wouldn't take that long for it to realize what was going on.
Right, it's smart. It's pretty intelligent at this point.
But she didn't. So the question is, why didn't she? I think my theory is she was drowning. She was scared. Calvin was probably squeezing her. She was probably losing oxygen, and all she could think was keep the latch closed. Keep it closed. Keep it closed. Because Gyllenhaal's character is on the other side trying to open it, trying to get to her. Although, again, he knew that Calvin was on her. I guess the question is, at what point do you draw that line and say, we're sacrificing this person because we cannot allow this thing back on the International Space Station? We can't do it.
Right. I think the moment that she decided herself,
that
she, like, I think, I'm not saying it's a line, but I think you can, if someone is willing to do that, maybe that's the point.
I think there's a training question here. Right. I think militarily we train in such a way as to address these kinds of scenarios.
Yeah, how would the military address this scenario?
Well, I don't know about this particular scenario.
Well, yeah, but something similar
where you just well, there are two sides to this coin. I think if you're the person that's stuck somewhere, and it would put everybody at risk if you were to try and escape, or they were trying to come and get you. You're trained in the military to say, okay, that's it. I am sacrificing myself. This is not, I cannot put everybody at risk. I can't put our nation at risk. I can't put other people at risk. And so therefore I am sacrificing myself. It's part of the training. It's part of the ethos. It's just part of the thinking. On the other hand, though, especially for the United States, I can't speak for every other country, but I can speak for the United States. We in the military say we do not leave our people behind. We do not do it. Vietnam was a very specific kind of war involving a lot of guerrilla warfare and unusual kinds of warfare, and people getting, seized as POWs. And I don't think our policy was that great at that time. Not to say that people were, leaving folks behind intentionally, but it was after Vietnam that we had a clear policy, which was we don't leave our people behind. So, I guess what I'm saying is I agree with you. I think that once she made the decision that she was not coming back inside with this thing on her, that everybody else should have backed off, which is an easy thing to say.
And harder to do, for sure.
And harder to do, to watch. And I think, too, that the other people on the space station were trained to come up with solutions for crazy problems. And they were probably thinking, well, let's get her inside, and then we'll deal with
we can figure it out.
Yeah. But they don't, she stays outside. And then how does he get inside again?
He gets in through, I think, the thrusters of the ISS. They start trying to fire the thrusters as it's entering to make sure it doesn't, but then they start to fall into a decaying orbit that would send them into the atmosphere if they kept doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So they had to stop and redirect back to orbit. And I think at that point, Calvin gets in through the thrusters, which I don't know how real, if I'm remembering that correctly, I don't know how realistic that is. I don't know if there's an intake.
Right. What's it intaking?
Yeah, like in the thrusters that they could possibly get through. Like, I would imagine the thrusters are a completely separate system. But I'm not a flight engineer or rocket scientist, so I don't know. But it seems unlikely to me.
And Rory, in this case, was dead already. So
Rory was dead. Yeah.
Yeah. So now Calvin's back inside, and the usual mayhem ensues. Everybody's trying to get away from it. Everybody's moving slowly. Everybody's getting squished. People are dying. People are getting injured. Stuff is happening. And we just have multiple scenes like that, right? Until we finally get to the point where it's just, we only have two people left. Rebecca Ferguson's character, the CDC quarantine officer, and the chief medical officer.
Right. And those are the last two.
The last two
that end up remaining.
Right.
And by this point, Calvin has killed Sho Murakami from Japan, was the systems engineer, and Hugh Derry, the exobiologist. And it seems like whenever it kills and consumes something, it can grow at least that much. You see it kind of feed on that lab rat early on, and then it's kind of feeding on Dr. Derry, and then I can't remember if it feeds on Sho Murakami or not.
They show it.
I don't know if they show it.
Yeah.
But so it gets both of them, and now there's only the two left, and they have to figure out how they're gonna deal with this. And as that's, or actually slightly before that happens, the Soyuz capsule or spacecraft, they see it incoming. So that's before, I think, Sho dies. I think Sho dies sometime around then. When the Soyuz is coming in.
But at least the Soyuz is coming in, which gets back to the previous point. Somebody has decided, like, this is the failsafe. We're going to
That's the last firewall.
Smash it with a giant capsule, because the Russians are already up there. The Soyuz is up there, and that, at least, I thought was realistic. And but I also thought it's kind of interesting too, because what that implies is Russia was a part, not just a part of.
Well, they were the mission lead.
They were the
mission commander.
But they were part of the discussions about security, about the fail-safes, about all of that stuff, which I think is good, and I think it's worth saying, because right now, in terms of our space programs here on Earth, Russia, as much as people may want to wish that they didn't have the capabilities that they do, this is a capability for them. They got to space first, not us. They continued their space program just like us. When we inexplicably got rid of our space shuttle program, we were paying the Russians to ferry our people up to the International Space Station. And
in Soyuz spacecrafts.
In the Soyuz spacecrafts. And they recently combined, Russia and China are working together on their space program, which is an incredible thing to even say, that these two countries that have been so competitive with each other have decided to do this. So I just thought that was good. That's a good piece of realism. They didn't say something silly like, well, the United States just happened to have a spare gigantic capsule, floating around, and it decided it was going to save the day. I thought that was good, and I like that they showed this international aspect, both in terms of who was on the International Space Station, and that, here with the Soyuz coming in and trying to smash it to smithereens.
Right. Yeah, I think that was definitely a high point for accuracy, that it was a Soyuz spacecraft specifically. That was coming to knock it out of orbit. But unfortunately, what ends up happening is, I don't know, something happens where when it crashes into the ISS, it knocks it into a decaying orbit again, instead of an outward orbit, which I don't I probably have to watch it again, but I did not clearly see why that was necessarily the case.
Well, I don't know.
That's when Sho. I know that's when Sho died, because he was trying another attempt at launching Calvin into space when he died. But I guess something got messed up, and they were back into a decaying orbit. So now they're at the last resort. You can't let this thing burn through the atmosphere. It'll probably survive based on everything we know about it.
Right.
So then David and Miranda, decide to try and trap Calvin in an escape pod. There's 2 escape pods on the ISS, according to the film. And David volunteers to lure Calvin into his pod, and then he will manually control it and try and fly it out into deep space, whereas Miranda will escape and go back to Earth. And then, unfortunately, both pods are hit by debris, upon launch from the damaged Soyuz. And then one ends in the South Pacific Ocean and is found by some Vietnamese fishermen. And the other one flies away into deep space. Right. And the way the film presents these series of events, you think that all is well. Miranda is the one that makes it to Earth. And David or Gyllenhaal is the one who is sent out. But that's not what ends up happening. It is the reverse that ends up happening, which was a little odd because I don't know how she would have not known that she was off course. He was being like strangled by Calvin and couldn't even adjust the control. Like Calvin is actively trying to hold his arm to make sure he couldn't touch the controls. So there's a little bit of a hint there that Calvin was trying to.
Well, so here's the thing, though, right? It's at this point that we're not really 100% sure what is happening with Calvin. Is Calvin sentient? Is Calvin really grabbing, and Gyllenhaal's hand because he knows that Gyllenhaal's character is trying to steer in a particular way and that's going to kill Calvin somehow? Does he know that? That would imply that he has some sort of ability to hear language, understand what Dr. Jordan and Dr. North are saying to each other, kind of figure out what's happening in terms of aerospace movement. You should be able to see where Earth is. Like that's just a whole lot of stuff going on. Although there's a theory out there that Calvin is perhaps psychic in some way. But aren't we guilty as watchers of this movie? Aren't we guilty of humanizing Calvin the way the exobiologist humanized Calvin in the first place? We're just lending it all these human characteristics. I don't know. I'll tell you, when I first saw the movie in the theater, I thought exactly what you said. That Calvin was in charge and Calvin was doing all this stuff. And in fact, I thought Calvin was making them think that Gyllenhaal's character was actually going into outer space and Ferguson's character was actually going to Earth. But then they realize that's not the case. Calvin tricks them, and in fact, it's the opposite. But when I saw the movie again, I watched it again on TV in preparation for this podcast, and I did not think that was the case. I thought it was more a situation in which there was a whole lot of bad luck going on. Decaying orbits and debris from stuff, pushing stuff off. It was certainly a good callback to what we see at the beginning of the movie, where the incoming capsule or whatever from Mars had been thrown off course by an asteroid or something. And everybody's having to deal with it. So I think it's really interesting. It's horrifying. They do a very good job of making it horrifying, but mostly I think it's horrifying because we're lending this entity, Calvin, all of these human characteristics and qualities.
I think that's a great point about the film that I hadn't even considered and I think that draws back to, Dr. Hugh Derry and his kind of personification of Calvin. And then we start to do that toward the end too, because we're like, okay, this thing is clearly intelligent in some way, shape, or form. Whether it's as intelligent as an octopus or a human, we don't know. But it's more intelligent than any other animal we've probably seen on Earth, other than humans, obviously. But then at the end, I think you make a good point, especially about it going for his hand. I find it extremely difficult to believe that Calvin knew what was going on.
Well,
exactly. So I think you're right. I think it was a case of bad luck. Calvin was just squeezing the hell out of him.
Right.
And his hand happened to be a part of that.
I think the most we could or should say about Calvin is that Calvin is animalistic and as such has a survival instinct like all animals do. And I guess many organisms also do. There's the drive towards survival. How that manifests itself, I don't know. I don't know that, the survival instinct is not really something that we think about. It's not higher level executive function, even in a human being, right? It's way down deep in the brain.
Yeah.
So, but, regardless, okay, so here we are, Gyllenhaal's pod with with Calvin in it. And growing in it is moving smartly towards Earth, and Rebecca Ferguson's escape pod is going off into deep space, and she is screaming for some unknown reason. I don't know why she's screaming. She's just screaming.
Maybe because she knows what's happening.
Well, okay.
That she's going off into space, because she should be able to tell when she's on re-entry. There's no way you can't tell.
Well, she was very worried about it, remember, before?
Yeah.
And Gyllenhaal's character is trying to tell her, look, you're basically on autopilot. You don't have to be a pilot. You can just, you press this one button. This is the one time.
This one button. But it doesn't work.
It doesn't work. Or, but that I thought.
I don't think we can attribute that to Calvin.
Nobody's going to be up. At least not right now. No, we don't send anybody on any kind of space mission without giving them
manual
multiple kinds of training. Yeah, because stuff happens. And this is something that is fully within our control to train a person on. She should have been trained on the operation of an escape pod. Every single one of those people should have been. If nothing else, they should have been trained on that, number one. And number two, remember that there was a movie starring Sandra Bullock and George Clooney? Gravity. Remember, well, one of the things I loved about that movie is that she was pulling, binders, manuals out of all over the place to figure out how
to fix the problem,
do things.
Yeah.
So there's just no reason there wouldn't. Of all things, of all places, there's no reason there wouldn't be a manual for the escape pod. So,
in every language.
I just have to also say, I think that it was unfair to the CDC. I don't think that CDC personnel in that position would be screaming their heads off for no good reason. I think I just feel like they would be just sort of resigned to their fate and still trying to figure out how to fly the thing and get it back going towards Earth.
Yeah.
Nothing else had happened to her spacecraft. It's not like it shut itself down.
I mean, and nothing even about like CDC personnel here in the US or the UK, because it's not clear which she's from.
Yeah.
Maybe she's from the UK, but it's not clear if she works for the US CDC or the UK's. But I think any person, if I was in there and I had never been in a spacecraft, I would just stop trying to fly it and start screaming. Like I would be messing around with buttons and trying different joysticks and controls, and if I would try everything I possibly could. And I think that's what you kind of expect from an astronaut is they're going to try everything.
I think it would have been better. I think it would have been better for her to start getting really frustrated. Maybe start crying, shedding some tears.
Yeah, crying I think would have been fine.
But screaming her head off, it doesn't make any sense to me. You scream your head off when Calvin is all over you, the way Gyllenhaal does try to scream, I think, for his part.
Right.
Everybody else is screaming because they're being attacked, and she's just screaming out. Well, I guess she's screaming into the void. Maybe somebody made a connection that she needed to scream into the void.
She also does know, though, that if she's going off course,
yes,
Well, actually, no, she doesn't know that means that the other one is headed toward Earth. She does not know that.
She does not know that. She doesn't know that. That's right.
Yeah.
But why didn't she try to communicate with Gyllenhaal's escape pod?
It's a great question.
Maybe the same communications issue still exists, maybe.
Which the communications issue just seems
or
made up for the movie.
We're back to the same point where she didn't receive any training on the escape pod, so she doesn't know which of these things would connect her to the other escape pod, I guess. Plus, she doesn't try to contact Houston. She doesn't try to contact anybody on Earth either.
She does a black box recording, but
except for the black box,
that's only available if it's retrieved.
If it's retrieved, yeah. I don't know. Okay, so then I have a question though. So now we're back to Gyllenhaal's escape pod. It's going towards Earth. He continues to try and do stuff, but he can't because now Calvin is gigantic and taking up all the space basically in this escape pod.
Right.
Why doesn't Calvin kill Gyllenhaal? Because we know he's not dead, because when the escape pod lands in the ocean, he's
screaming, no.
He's screaming, don't come and,
don't open this.
Don't open it. So he's not just like barely alive. He's alive. Yeah.
I was wondering that too. Like I was actually going to ask you the same question. I don't know why Calvin left him alive. I don't know if like maybe he was just feeding on him slowly. I mean, it's not like it's that long of time for reentry. So, and I don't think he didn't need, and Calvin should be smart enough to know he did not need. Now I'm saying calling it a he.
Yeah.
Personifying. Calvin did not know that, or like Calvin should not have thought, if it can think, that it needed Jake Gyllenhaal's character to survive.
Right.
He should have known that it could survive that reentry without him there, and he could have just been feeding. I think it was for dramatic effect at the end when he's like, no, don't open it.
Well, I bet the director filmed two different endings.
Yeah.
I think there was the one that we saw, and then there was probably one in which Gyllenhaal is dead, and you see those boats, the fishermen coming over, and they open the door, and we as the audience were probably just left to go screaming, don't open it, ourselves.
Right.
And the director probably made a choice that it was more, dramatic to have Gyllenhaal yelling at everybody and people ignoring him, regardless. So, but there is another thing I think we need to talk about. Now he's down on Earth, and this thing is in Earth, and of course it's going to escape out of the door that they're going to open, and it's going to get out. So I have a few questions at this point. First of all, we have not seen Calvin divide, other than
he has not
at the beginning. He has not reproduced. We don't know that it can reproduce.
Right.
So what's going to happen? It's just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's going to become like Godzilla or something. That's just a question. That's just sort of a theoretical question.
Yeah.
Number one. Number two, if Calvin goes around consuming everybody and everything, eventually does Calvin die? Or does Calvin go into the same state?
Hibernation.
Yeah, that it was when it was on Mars. And is this a potential explanation for what happened to Mars? Maybe Mars was more like Earth, and
this thing consumed all of it.
Calvin, or many Calvins, consumed everything, consumed all the energy, just consumed everything. If you consume absolutely everything, that's got to change the ecosystem.
Absolutely. If you take away all the, so like if there were if there were trees or plants on Mars that were providing oxygen to the atmosphere.
And you took all the water.
Yeah, you took all the water.
You took everything.
Then
how would it become so tiny though? If it's so gigantic and then so tiny. I don't know, maybe then at that point it does break itself up into little pieces.
Yeah.
Possibly. But there's a more important question here, which is just if we imagine the escape pod comes to Earth, we know, given our own intelligence capabilities, our own satellites, and the fact that the Soyuz was directed right by somebody.
So people on the ground knew
what was going on, and they had to have tracked that escape pod coming into Earth. We track satellites that are falling out of orbit.
Right.
So we had to have known at some point, just upon, gross examination of the sky, at some point we would know that this is coming down. So, or at least that it's splashed down somewhere in the ocean. At that point, who would be responsible for securing the nation or nations? Who would be responsible? What would Earth's response be to this? Because I don't mean just like, okay, it's splashed down. They're going to see eventually. They're going to see Calvin. It's not like he's going to go sneaking around.
All those people opening up the door are going to be dead. Right.
So Vietnam's going to find out very quickly. All of those countries are going to find out. This thing is going to be roaming around all over the place. What then? Who takes charge? Because this doesn't sound, at this point, this is not about international space. This is not like NASA's responsibility to go do something about this thing that's now
Vietnam. Yeah.
So do we think it becomes a military thing?
I think that's a great question. But what military? Is it NATO? Is it, is the UN pulling together? How long is it going to take to pull together an international response? So it has to be international. It can't just be like the U.S. military decides, okay, we're gonna nuke Vietnam because that's where it landed. I don't think any country could do that.
I don't know. I don't think we would know to do it, even if we did say we were going to do it. I don't think we would know that we would need to do it.
Exactly. The only way you would know is if Rebecca Ferguson's black box recording somehow got transmitted.
Or Calvin comes over to your country. I mean, at some point, somebody is going to report it, and it will get to everybody. My answer to your first two questions is it would take NATO way too long.
Right.
To get organized, and also they have no authority. They have no jurisdiction over the.
And in Vietnam,
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe if it landed in the Atlantic, in the North Atlantic, then it makes sense that NATO would do something. But it takes a long time for them to get their not acts together, but get organized enough to do something. And the United Nations does not have. I mean, they have their peacekeeping force, right? Otherwise, they depend on countries for donations and for personnel and resources and stuff to go do things. So I think the United Nations, maybe the United Nations could give permission to do something, and you know what, we are, perhaps, let's give the United Nations some credit. Let's give the world some credit. If they sent the Soyuz up to knock the International Space Station out of orbit or to destroy it.
That means you're at least Russia's involved, and if
Russia's involved,
we're probably involved, and
I would think that everybody involved,
Japan,
all of
UK,
this,
yeah.
So let's pretend that the United Nations, like everybody, sort of decided together, like, okay, the Soyuz has got to go and do this because it's up there, and so maybe they are thinking like, okay, this is coming down, but do they ever find out how big Calvin got? At what point do the communications go out? And when is it communicated back to Earth? Because if they think it's that little teeny tiny thing,
they're not going to use a nuke. They're not going to nuke a country over that. Yeah.
But they might have gotten organized, is what I'm saying. Maybe they lean forward and say, okay, something is horribly wrong if we have to send the Soyuz up there to completely obliterate the International Space Station.
Yeah, so they knew it was a threat to Earth.
Right. So they might be on alert. They might have enough people who are on alert, but they didn't get a chance to tell, fishermen out on the ocean, that this is something is happening. So I guess the answer, I'm going to answer my own question. I think that at that point it does become a military thing. They don't have any choice. The only thing they can do, I think, is they are going to have to use a nuclear weapon against it. What else could we try?
I mean, given everything that we saw, and they don't have this information, but given everything we saw as a viewer, I think nuclear weapons, I think that was almost implied by Rebecca Ferguson as Dr. North when she was doing her black box recording. She said, use any available means necessary to eliminate it, which I think basically means nuclear weapons. But yeah, I think
it has to be
interesting. It has to be. Yeah.
Because it's so big, it fills the entire escape pod by the time it gets to Earth, right? It's almost like half of the escape pod is Calvin. So even if it was docile, how much, how many chemicals would you have to drop on it, to
actually
integrate, Yeah. I don't think we have anything that big. That's not what how our chemical weapons were created in the first place. They're not gigantic things.
Right.
So,
and if it survived on, and this is a hardy organism, it survived on Mars for hundreds of millions of years.
Yeah, there's
nothing able to survive the vacuum of space. They were questioning whether it could survive re-entry.
Yeah.
One thing I
say that acid or something would even work on it.
I mean, who knows if a nuke would even work? We don't know that. It might not. Which then would be very devastating. Because I think, well, yes, the international community sent up the Soyuz. Setting up the Soyuz to potentially kill 6 people is very different than dropping a nuke on Vietnam and destroying the country.
Or not, even if it's not on Vietnam itself, you'd have to be dropping it into the Pacific Ocean.
Right.
And
who knows
the impact on our ecosystem. Yeah, I don't think it would be an easy decision, but I do think there are two things to address here. One is that it is clear that NASA and other agencies like NASA, they need to have, for the United States, it's an Office of not Pandemic Preparedness, it's the Office of Planetary Protection, as opposed to Planetary Defense. And, we have called in our blueprints, we called in recommendation 15 for that office to be authorized by Congress. It needs to be authorized, if only because it needs to have a dedicated, true mandatory spending budget line dedicated to it. It has to have that, and it has to for these kinds of. I know it sounds like a crazy scenario, but we're bringing things back. We're bringing specimens back from outer space. And, for all of our efforts to prevent forward and backward contamination, if we're going to be prepared for the worst case possibility, then it's this kind of office that would prepare for that. Exactly. And we wanted to prepare for that in peacetime and for things that are not going to require military intervention. But the other thing, I think, is we also have a recommendation about the Department of Defense doing a biodefense posture review. We actually called it like a policy review or something back in our 2015 blueprint. We want them to continue to do the one that they actually did produce, the biodefense posture review, I think is what it's called, that DoD put out. We want them to continue to do that, but I think they need to take some of this other stuff into account. If not in the biodefense posture review, then or the biological posture review, then they need to take it into account otherwise, in some other policy review.
Right.
The Department of Defense. for our own Department of Defense, and I would say all departments of defenses all throughout the world. I don't think this is a wholly unrealistic scenario. I know we're picking it apart.
Yeah, we pick it apart, but I mean, let's be fair to Calvin. Calvin was unprecedented. Worst case scenario. The only thing that's not worst case scenario about it is it doesn't seem to reproduce.
Yeah, that we could see.
That we could see.
Yeah, so far. Yeah, I think that I don't know. I think that's a lesson. This is a lesson we all need to, we should be paying attention to.
Right.
This office, at least, look, as far as we're concerned, never mind. I imagine the Department of Defense actually probably does have some kind of contingency that's sort of labeled miscellaneous, miscellaneous things that we might have to do something about, and just sort of is comfortable with leaving it with a question mark on it. There might be something that requires some sort of military intervention, including the use of one or multiple nuclear weapons by the United States and other countries. We might try some other stuff. We don't know. Maybe a hypersonic weapon might work against Calvin.
Right. It might.
Some of our other movies where, water is somehow, dangerous, problematic, or some weird thing, might be effective. But there won't be very much time in this case,
exactly,
to really try all that stuff out. But I think it's worth reinforcing our recommendation here that the Office of Planetary Protection needs to be authorized.
Yeah, I think so too. Because this is, and it's not like this is like, yes, it's a future case scenario, but it's not that far into the future.
Mm-hmm.
If we're planning to send people if we're planning on bringing Mars samples back within the next 5 to 10 years, designing those labs and designing those containment protocols, that needs to start now.
It does need to start now.
It can't just be a regular BSL-4. I don't think that's enough. I think NASA has even acknowledged that. There are certain things that you have to do because, they're also trying to do science. So there are different requirements and things like that they need to figure out. And I don't think they're going to be able to do that unless they're authorized and the Office of Planetary Protection has a dedicated budget line to help them actually execute on this.
And personnel and consistent resources.
Right.
I think if we're going to do this, if we're going to space and we're going, which we are, we're certainly not going to stay back here while Russia and China and Japan and India and everybody else goes. That spaceship has sailed. We're in it now. We have to do it. And so if we have to do it, then we need to acknowledge the possibility of these kinds of scenarios, and and lesser beings as well. A bunch of what we care about is just the biological piece, just the organisms coming back. But we have to have it. This has to happen now. If we're going, we have to have both an Office of Planetary Protection and an Office of Planetary Defense properly authorized and properly resourced. And as we budget for all of these missions, the Artemis mission, the Ares mission, the whatever mission, they should be including in that budget some amount of money that goes to the Office of Planetary Protection and Planetary Defense, I guess, depending on what it is. But I think that's really important. I think we've been forcing NASA and other space agencies into this thing where this cycle where we care for a little while and then someone says, oh, geez, we need money for something else. And they cut NASA back and it goes back.
Right.
It's not.
And it's very similar to how the biodefense spending occurs. You have call it cycles of panic and neglect. I don't know if you could really call it that for NASA, but, they have the same funding shortfalls that most of the biodefense enterprise does in the federal government, where not having access to multi-year funding or things like that really inhibits their ability to properly prepare and to innovate and things like that. And, every dollar that we put into NASA, we're getting a lot back in terms of research, technology, things like that. So if NASA, and NASA's very efficient with their money because they don't have very much. But if they start, working on a super BSL-4 laboratory, maybe they'll call it BSL-5, I don't know. That's going to have direct impacts on the ground for what we can do here. Same thing with PPE, and indoor air quality. And, so a bunch of, the recommendations that we've made, I think, if NASA takes this step forward, will help us a lot here on the ground for, preventing pandemics and biological threats that, are terrestrial rather than extraterrestrial.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
All right. You want to get to the ratings?
Let's get to the ratings.
Okay. Relevance to commission recommendations. Is Asha Biodefense, critical infrastructure, indoor air quality, or biosafety and biosecurity recommendation from Apollo. And then I think it it raises attention to the PPE questions or recommendations as well. I mean, even though the film, it demonstrated gaps, I think, really well, even if those gaps were exaggerated.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm thinking somewhere between a 3 or maybe a 4. What do you think?
I think we should give it a 4.
Yeah.
I'm giving it a 4 because I mean, granted, okay, it's not going to handle. It's not a movie that's going to address, the vast majority of our recommendations, but we do have a recommendation with 2 action items about astrobiodefense.
Right.
This clearly supports that. We have an entire report about defending critical infrastructure from biological threats. And while the whole report is not necessarily relevant here, it should have it. If anything, it's a ding on us, not a ding on the movie.
On the movie, yeah.
And then, I think the other things you mentioned too, they are applicable, and there are things that need to be taken up. So I would give it a 4. I'm going to give it a 4.
Okay, settle on 4 then.
Okay.
All right. Scientific accuracy.
I think it should get a 2.
Yeah, I was going to say it has to be low.
It has to be
the
low.
amount of things that are just kind of like you have to suspend disbelief for there's a lot.
Yeah, but it wasn't entirely inaccurate.
Right.
It's not like, for example, there was at least a glove box in the laboratory. There was at least a laboratory. There were mentions of protocols, even though everybody wasn't, necessarily aware of all those protocols. The medical points I thought were accurate. The science regarding the decaying orbits and all of that seemed accurate. But then it goes completely off the rails in terms of the science, I think. So I think a 2.
Yeah, I agree. I think a 2, just because the amount of things that just don't seem totally realistic. I think, the scientific accuracy, it can't be a 3. It has to be a 2. So completely agree.
Okay.
What about the scenario development? So I think I'm kind of inclined to give this a lower score.
Okay.
While the overall scenario is good, it's not too different from the movie Alien. And I think it, comparing it to Alien, I think it misses a lot of steps or key points. But I do appreciate that it does have a focus on the biological side of things a lot more than Alien does. Even if the scientific accuracy is not there. So I don't know, actually. Maybe a 3?
I think it should get a 3 because one thing it does have going for it is that it is provocative. It does make you think. At many points during the movie, it makes you ask, what could we do or what should be done? And it doesn't take you completely out of the movie in terms of its ridiculousness. Some movies are just so out there that you just
can't believe the scenario.
Yeah. This did have believable aspects to it. Like you said, you're having to suspend your disbelief quite a bit, but you could do it.
Yeah.
So I think a 3.
Okay. I agree. I think a 3. Entertainment value. I would probably give it a 3 or a 4.
Yeah. I think I would give it a 4.
Yeah.
Just not so much because if you put the realism part aside, just put whether it's realistic or not aside, it's a horror movie.
Yeah, and it does accomplish that.
And people, it was scary and nerve-wracking, and you were left wondering what's going to happen, and are they going to be able to do something? Are they going to be able to survive? I thought it was entertaining. It didn't bore me. I never looked at my watch, wondering when is this horrible movie going to end.
Right. Okay, yeah, I think a 4 is a fair score because I feel the same way. I think the entertainment value of it, like it is an interesting movie, especially with the cast that it has, and the scenario. And horror and sci-fi films, I feel like sometimes will get lower ratings than your traditional drama films. So I feel like we have to rate it within that context.
Okay.
So I think I would give it a 4.
Okay.
Okay, and then so for the next category, it's success of the imagination, or otherwise creativity. Basically the opposite of failure of the imagination.
Yeah.
So I think while not totally believable, the extent to which they went with Calvin's abilities, I think was a success of the imagination.
Okay.
But I don't know if I would give it a 5.
No, I think
because a lot of this, I feel like also it is very similar to Alien.
Yeah, it's derivative.
Yeah, it's kind of derivative. So I would say the main difference between this and Alien is that, or the main difference is that one, Alien is better. And 2, this definitely goes into the biological things a lot more.
Yeah.
The biological side of things, and containment, and there's a CDC person.
Yeah.
And it does present a threat that will get people thinking.
Okay.
I mean, so I would say either a 3 or maybe a 4. I don't know. What do you think?
I think I would give it a 4.
4?
I mean, because look, at least they did it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And we were kind of talking about how, this is definitely like the worst case scenario. And I feel like it's good that they did it and they explored it. Yeah. Okay. So we'll give that a 4. And then the next category is the shock or surprise value.
Okay.
This one was a little hard for me because I can't remember how surprised I was the first time I watched it. Or shocked.
Yeah. Well, I think there are a few times when we are surprised.
Yeah.
One is when Calvin does more than just divide.
Right. Well, yeah, when he starts moving and
when it becomes a thing, that's a surprise. I was surprised.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting that.
I thought, okay, we have a microorganism. It's going to divide. It's going to replicate. It's going to, it's just going to
be an infectious agent. Is probably what we were thinking.
Exactly. But then it becomes a thing. It's born.
Right.
So that was a surprise. And then I think there were surprises throughout in terms of what Calvin could do. It was surprising that he didn't get burned when Ryan Reynolds' character was trying to burn it. It was surprising what it could do outside, in space. That it could survive that. It had some surprising qualities. So, I mean, they did have some. That's what I'm saying. But I would not say the whole thing was like super surprising.
Yeah.
I would give it a 3.
I think a 3 is a good number for it. Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay.
Let's see here. And then the next category is government policy.
Mm-hmm.
I think we got to give this a low mark.
Well, we definitely have to give it a low mark for procedures.
Yeah.
Because obviously the government was all over this. This was not, at least with the Aliens franchise, that was private sector going sitting all over the place, right? This was government. The CDC, is all over it. Obviously, NASA's put people up there. Soyuz is involved. That's a national space program asset. So, yeah, I would give it. I don't know. I would give it a 1.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Like a 1, because like there are no good policy decisions made here. I feel like.
Yeah. No, I'm giving it a 1.
Yeah,
Not
1
seeing
out of
anything
5.
good here. Yeah.
Okay, portrayal by the actors.
I don't know.
Were they believable as scientists
I think
or engineers?
some of them were. I don't remember thinking anybody was doing a bad job at portrayal. I did think that the exobiologist,
yeah, he was a little
completely stupid.
Yeah,
but that doesn't. But if he was told to do that,
right?
It's not like it was his choice. He might have said, "Hey, I don't think this is realistic. I don't think I would just be floating around without." Without being completely covered head to toe with my hands in a glove box, and the director might have said, "Too bad."
Right, exactly. So I don't think we could fault them for that.
I think,
and that's really only one character. I feel like that was.
I do have a problem with Rebecca Ferguson screaming into space. At the end.
But again, that could have been direction.
Yeah, it could have been. I guess. I don't know. I think a 3 or a 4. I wouldn't give it a 5.
Definitely not a 5. Well, so let's look at the cast really quick. Jake Gyllenhaal, Rebecca Ferguson, Ryan Reynolds, Hiroyuki Sanada, which was good.
You like Ryan Reynolds?
Yeah, Ryan Reynolds, Jake Gyllenhaal did good. Hiroyuki, I feel like, was a little underutilized.
Yeah.
He's a fantastic actor, and again, not his fault that he was kind of underutilized. Kat, the Russian, I think she was good as well. Let's give it a 4.
Okay.
And we'll detract points on the direction, which is the next one.
Okay.
Direction, I'd probably give a 2 or a 3.
I would say a 3 because I thought some of the shots inside the space station, when they're moving around, when Calvin is moving around, I thought that was directed really, really, really
well. Yeah.
But it really created a lot of tension, putting aside the fact that it should never have happened in the first place, but it did. And so, there you have it.
Here we are. Yeah. Okay. I agree with that. 3 out of 5 sounds good to me. And then for production, I think it was a beautiful film to watch.
Well, I'd give it a 4.
I would give it a 4 as well. I really don't have very many complaints about the production of it and how it looked and how it came across in terms of, cinematography and CGI and all of that. I think that the alien Calvin looked pretty good.
Yeah.
Especially at various stages of its life cycle.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think a 4.
Okay.
Now
what's our average?
3.2. Okay, yeah, 3.2 isn't a bad score. I consider that passing, almost.
Yeah, I think. Look, I think a 3. A 3 for us is the movie was good. It wasn't awful.
Right.
I think that fits with what we were saying. It's just, I think for this movie, there were some really great things about it. I really appreciate that it really demonstrates why we need some of the security measures we're talking about. I like, scenario developments. They obviously put a lot of money into the film, but we didn't see anything stupid like, zippers on the back of Ewoks or, stuff that's just not, it didn't make any sense. Because they were being too cheap. It didn't look cheap. It never looked like it wasn't in space. They were floating around appropriately. Like there's a lot, I think, it was just good.
Yeah. I mean, even with like the blood.
Even with the blood, I agree.
That floated,
But the stuff that, there's sufficient drawbacks for this movie.
Yeah.
Sort of balance that out and bring it back down to average. So, yeah, I think 3.2 seems fair.
I agree. I think so as well.
All right.
Well, thank you all for joining us on this episode of the Biollywood Podcast. And we look forward to seeing you next time.
Next time.